Hey everybody, I'm Ethan James with the honestcarpenter.com, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to make windowsill extensions. These custom windowsill shelves create a lot of extra room for potted plants, decorations, or of course cats who like to sit around and stare out the window all day. Your average windowsill, or stool as it's technically called, is only about 3 to 5 inches deep. These extension shelves are 9 inches deep, which is about the depth of your average bookshelf. I think this is a good size because it doesn't extend too far into the room and it doesn't create too much cantilever. I'm installing our new shelf in this 3-bay window. Notice that this window doesn't have side casings, just wrapped drywall corners. I'll talk more about what to do if your shelf has side casings in a moment, but to get started, the first thing I do is pull the total length of the existing sill. It's about 91 inches here. I want my shelf to overhang the sill a little, so I'm going to add an inch to each end and make it 93. I also take a moment to find the exact center of this sill and make a mark there, which will help as a reference point going forward. For our material, I'm using pre-primed pine. I wanted a 1x10, which is actually 9 1/4 inches wide, which would have been perfect, but Home Depot was out, so I had to get this 1x12. This means I have to rip this down to size using my circular saw and rip fence, then ease the back edge with some 180 grit sandpaper. After that, I can measure 93 inches on the stock and make my crosscut there using a speed square as a right angle guide for my saw. With the piece cut to length, I also find and mark its center point on the back edge as well. The next layout step is easier to do by eye, so I take the piece inside and set it in place on the existing sill. Here I can position it effectively by lining up my two center point marks. Without moving or sliding the piece, I begin to make little tick marks at the location of the window separations, or mullions. We'll need to notch the shelf at these marks so it can fit around these areas. Also, the straight edge of our shelf reveals some inconsistent depths across the window bays. To try to isolate this, I measure the depth of the wall at every notch mark and note it on the board. This is kind of an inexact science because the wall may also be bowed, but I found it helps create a tighter fit down the line. As mentioned, if you have window casings instead of finished drywall, you'll also have to notch the bottom of your casings to make room for the new shelf. Just use a scrap of your stock to scribe a line on your casings. Then cut a control line at the top side of this mark and pry out the piece. You can use either a back saw to do this or an oscillating multi-tool. I can't show that full demo on this window, but if you check out my video on trim rot repair, you can see a very clear depiction of how to make plunge cuts with the multi-tool and how to carefully remove trim sections. So, heading outside once again, I use my speed square and measuring tape to plot the notches that we just measured. To cut these notches, you can really use a variety of tools. I'm using a jigsaw for speed, but a coping saw or even a back saw would probably do the job. And to make these 3-sided notches quickly, I sometimes even use an old job site trick. Making the perimeter cuts with the saw, I just score the third line deeply with the utility knife, then knock out the piece with the hammer. Keep in mind, this only works if your score line is running with the grain, but if the break is a little ragged, it can be cleaned up easily with a chisel, and any rough wood on the underside will be hidden after installation. The next step is optional, but before I test my fit, I like to use a 1/4 inch roundover bit in my router to put a cope on the outer edges of my shelf. This just adds a soft touch to the project. You can go with the normal square edge or ease it over like mine. Either way works. Here you can see I've slid my shelf into place and everything fits pretty well. I did have to take the shelf outside once and trim a little more off the back to accommodate a crooked window, but the remaining gaps are nothing caulk can't handle. If you have big gaps, try to figure out why they're there. Usually a tight spot at the back can be eased or cut down just a bit, making the whole shelf slide in more tightly. Now I just have to attach the shelf into place. I'm going to do this with a combination of liquid nails and 3-inch screws. I usually use a caulking gun for the adhesive, but I wanted to point out that liquid nails also comes in these project tubes. It's a smaller amount and doesn't require a caulking gun. I just attach the nozzle and cut the tip with the utility knife, then I can squeeze it out by hand. It's best to make zigzag patterns, running a bead about a 1/4 inch thick. With the adhesive laid out, I gently set the piece in place and press it down firmly. I use a 9/64 bit to drill 3 holes near the back of the shelf, one in the center of each window bay. I follow up the drill bit with a countersink bit to make clearance for my screw head. Then I drive 3-inch screws into our pre-drilled holes. I really want to make sure that I fill them sink into the framing lumber beneath the original stool. The adhesive alone would be enough to hold our shelf down, but if the old sill is a little loose, it can't hurt to tap into the framing lumber for total security. Now I'm down to the finishing touches. I spackle the screw heads and trowel them with a 5-in-1. Then, since I'm using white trim paint, I tape off any non-white surface, like the mullions, and caulk the seams around the shelf. I usually pull this tape to keep caulk from adhering to it. Then, when the caulk is dry, I tape again, apply a second coat of caulk, and put down 2 coats of paint plus primer. When that's had time to dry, I'll have a project identical to the one that I installed downstairs. That's how you make custom windowsill extensions. If you have any questions, please ask them down in the comments. I promise I'll try to respond. Also, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and check back in for our future videos. I'm Ethan James with thehonestcarpenter.com. Thanks for watching, everybody.